Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Low Oxalate Kitchen podcast, where the goal is to make a low oxalate diet more simple and accessible to anyone who's looking to follow it. Today's guest is biologist and chef Alysha Melnyk. Alysha has combined her background in biology with her passion for making food delicious, eye-catching, and accessible. She's the founder and content creator for the Kitchenologist, a blog that's dedicated to healthy eating and experimenting in the kitchen. In addition to creating content for her blog, Alysha is the recipe creator for Taproot Farm, an organic farm in Berks County, Pennsylvania. When she's not cooking in the kitchen or dreaming up a recipe, she works as a full-time implementation specialist at an international medical nonprofit called ECRI, that's ECRI, which is located in suburban Philadelphia and is dedicated to improving patient safety worldwide. Alysha finds her many career passions revolve around the power of knowledge and that equipping people with the right tools and resources can help them make better informed decisions. In this episode, we talk to Alysha about how she got into cooking, and then we talk about a few recipes of hers that are low in oxalate. You can find links to her blog, recipes, and everything else we talk about at lowoxalatekitchen.com/podcast. Send me an email at lowoxalatekitchen@gmail.com and let me know what you think. And I hope you enjoy the show. Alysha, welcome to the Low Oxalate Kitchen podcast.
Thanks so much, Vincent. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
All right, so you brought a couple of recipes that we sort of modified to make them lower in oxalate.
Yes.
But I want to get to know you a little bit. So I thought we'd just start with, how you got into cooking, what made you decide you wanted to start experimenting in the kitchen.
Absolutely. So it's actually kind of funny because I wasn't really into cooking per se until after college. So I went to school at a small liberal arts college. It's called Susquehanna University. And I actually took a course my senior year of college, which was called Sustainable Food Systems. And that's really initially sort of the point that I really got interested in cooking and sourcing local foods and trying to be really creative in the kitchen. So after college, when I found myself at home working, your standard 9 to 5 job, I found that I had a lot of, time in the evenings or sometimes on weekends, just because I wasn't studying or doing other activities. And that's when I started to get really creative. I was really passionate about, trying to find things locally and using those ingredients and coming up with recipes. And I've always enjoyed art and things like that. And I feel like cooking is a lot like art. You can create things, make things look different, kind of do your own spin and twist on everything. And, I think having a science background as well, I was a biology major, it's really sort of an experimentation process too. So for me, it's kind of fun going into the kitchen and doing sort of a kitchen experiment by combining different flavors and spices and ingredients and trying to figure out how all of those come together.
Yeah, for sure. What was the you said it was Sustainable Food Systems was the
Yes.
class that you took?
hmm
Is there anything that that stuck out from that class or something that really surprised you?
Definitely. So actually, one of the requirements of the class was that we helped with the community garden. And even though my family growing up, we always had a small garden and something that we all worked with, I was never really, into that. I was just kind of like, oh, this is something we have to do. It's another additional chore. And I think after a number of years of living off of college food, which I mean, it wasn't terrible, but it also, wasn't, right out of the garden per se.
Yeah, not the
We had the
best.
yeah, just you kind of had to get a little bit creative. And I think for me, after, just working in the garden and having that connection to, seeding the vegetables, watching them grow, tending to them, and then being able to enjoy the end product, it just had a different, framework for me at the way I was looking at it. And I think too, just looking at our food culture in general and how, a lot of us have gravitated in the past number of years toward processed foods or, foods that aren't exactly what their raw ingredient is. So, we have kale, but then today we have, kale nuggets, kale burgers, kale. So everything has to be processed into something else. And, I think that was something that I kind of personally just wanted to get back to really the roots per se of of what these vegetables are and how you can prepare those in their form as is.
Hmm. And you said you were mentioning before we started recording that
Hmm.
you grow some of your own vegetables now, you and
Yes.
maybe at your parents' house.
Hmm. Yes, so they have a good area of land in Berks County, and since we've always sort of grown vegetables, and my dad's an avid gardener, we've really sort of had that connection out here. So we just have a small sort of three-bed garden, but we'll grow a variety of greens, so typically chard and spinach and kale. We do grow a lot of zucchini. We also have a tea garden. So we do have mint teas and things like that we grow. And also we talked a little bit about a spaghetti squash. So that's something that we actually only tried in the past few years and it really took off. We were actually really surprised. And this year we harvested around, say, like 40 spaghetti squash in total. So that was pretty impressive. And we definitely enjoy doing that. And especially now that I enjoy getting out there and helping with it, it's kind of a fun family activity.
Yeah, for sure. And you were saying that you sun cure some of the spaghetti
Yeah.
squashes, right?
Hmm.
So how
And
do yeah, so I mean, because when I go to the grocery store, I buy a bunch of vegetables, and then if I get to them, then great. But
yeah,
a lot of times, I'm sure a lot of people are in the same boat. Some stuff goes bad, and
oh
it
yeah,
just you can't get to it all. So
absolutely.
how do you sun cure the squashes?
So this was something that actually somebody from our farmer market had mentioned to me because we had harvested so many, so I was chatting with them about it, and they said a good way to do that was to basically after you harvest the squash to lay them out in the sun. So we have a picnic table on our back porch, and I just laid those out there and had them out for a few days facing the sun, and then would rotate them, and I guess what that does essentially is it helps cure the outer shell of the squash, at least from what they were telling me. And then that can sort of help give it a longer shelf life. But for a lot of the sort of hardier vegetables, so if it's not like a green, if it's like a root vegetable or a squash product, really what I've heard from people is those can keep for quite a while. So if you do have them packaged correctly, you can store them. In the case of, squashes like butternut or spaghetti squash, I've heard that you can put them in a cool, dry area, maybe have them in a sort of cardboard box with some, airflow. And those can keep, I mean, we still have squash right now, and those were harvested back in September. So it's been quite a number of months. And I also have some butternut squash down there too that I've gotten in markets and it's kept and for carrots and beets and things like that. If you have them packaged in bags and have them in your refrigerator, they should stay pretty good. I think I still have carrots down there from September, October that are still wrapped up and ready to go. The greens though are another story. I wish I could lengthen their lifespan, but those tend to be the things for me that go bad the fastest.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And if anyone from the future is listening, we're recording this in March, so that stuff has lasted you at least 6 months.
Yep. Hmm.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's
which
awesome.
is yeah, really great right now.
Yeah, for sure. And you said you have a tea garden also?
Yes.
Tell me about the tea garden.
So mainly we have mint tea. So it's referred to as meadow mint tea. It's something I think pretty common actually around the Lancaster County area. So we basically that actually is something that we don't have to plant every year. It just comes up in that bed and regrows each year. And it's really nice having a fresh tea garden because you can harvest the leaves right off the plant and then, put that into boil water, put the leaves in, and then basically shut the heat off and just let the leaves kind of soak in there. I typically do it for around a full day. And then you can, pour your tea into a container, put it in the refrigerator, and then it's ready to go. Another tea that we have grown a little bit of is holy basil tea, and that's also really good and really refreshing. Something that actually the CSA Taproot Farm that I've done recipes for, they've included that in their CSA share, and that's honestly become a new favorite for me.
So the meadow mint tea and the
Mhm.
basil tea, are those forgive me, I don't I don't know too much about it. Is the are they different from what you would find in the grocery store?
So probably just a different, variety and look. The meadow mint tea they're kind of fuzzy leaves. So if you touch them, they kind of have sort of a fuzz to them, and they're a light green in color, a little bit larger, I would say, than what you would typically see in your standard, grocery store mint. Just depends on the variety. And with the holy basil tea, actually, those leaves are more similar, I would say, to what you may see in a grocery store if they do a mint section. Probably more similar in look to spearmint leaves. So a little bit thinner, smaller, don't really have that fuzz to them.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll have to. Maybe we can get some of the meadow mint tea from you guys, and we we can send samples of stuff to get tested for its oxalate level.
Oh,
And I know
nice.
other mint, yeah, I know other mint teas are low, so maybe this one might be too. Um,
Definitely. Yeah, happy to pass those along.
cool. So you mentioned Taproot Farm,
Hmm.
which is a local organic farm near you in Pennsylvania.
Yes.
So tell me how you got involved with them and what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually it's interesting. So I kicked off my food blog, The Kitchenologist, about, a little bit over 2 years ago now, and I was working on the blog for about 6 months, and was posting recipes and things through Instagram. And I saw a post. I honestly don't remember how I started following the farm on Instagram. It probably was connected to a local market or store. Typically, I tend to follow a lot of those pages. And they had posted that their recipe creator at that time for their CSA, which is their community shared agriculture program, was moving. So they wanted to have somebody who ideally was local, just so it was easier to, get these vegetables or pick them up at a location, and somebody who was willing to create about one recipe a week that would use ingredients in the community shared agriculture program. So for anyone who may not be familiar with community shared agriculture, it's something that a lot of farms have done or are starting to do, and it's basically that you buy a share. It could be a different size, small, medium, large, of a lot of places do vegetables, some places do egg shares or mushroom shares or meat shares, and really it's purchasing to know that you're, of course, putting that money, for the farm, and then receiving whatever that growing season is yielding. And Taproot is pretty good about sort of highlighting these are the sorts of vegetables that, we're growing and we're hoping to provide for you. Of course, it depends on the weather and things like that, which can impact, who gets what vegetable, or there may be less of one season versus another. And with that program, Ola, who is a co-owner with her husband George, she, wanted somebody who could do these recipes so individuals could know how to use a lot of the ingredients in the CSA. Just because you will get some unique ones, maybe ones that you haven't cooked before, or some people join CSA programs because they do want to, have sort of a healthier cooking experience or farm to table experience. So this was a way for me to develop recipes for them, and it's sort of a bartering process. I wish that a lot more interactions today kind of work that way, but it's basically I do recipes and photos and postings for them in exchange for getting fresh vegetables, which is a really great trade-off in my opinion.
Yeah, that sounds like a great deal.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, cool. So you mentioned that you get a lot of unique veggies from them.
Hmm.
So let's jump into the recipes here.
Yeah,
The first one we have is the kohlrabi hash browns that you make.
yeah,
I looked in the store for these in two different ones. I couldn't find them,
yeah.
but I have a couple more on my list that I'm gonna go and try and get to them,
Oh,
or
nice.
try and find them rather. But if you can't find kohlrabi, you said you can do it with any other root vegetable, right?
Yes, I would say, turnips, any sort of hard rutabaga is another one that it just has that hard, root vegetable.
Right. Okay. Cool. So, actually, I got instead of the kohlrabi last night when I went to the store, I got a rutabaga. So
Oh,
I'm gonna
nice.
definitely gonna try it with that. I've never cooked with that either, so
Yeah,
um, we'll give it a whirl.
awesome.
Yeah. So I really like this one because I'm excited to try and cook new veggies. And always looking
Yep.
for different ways to make them taste good. So I also
Yeah.
really miss potatoes. That's one of the things that is sort of limited
Yeah.
for people on this diet. And hash browns
Hmm.
are delicious. So the fact that you came up with
Yes. Great
the
comfort
fact that you
food.
came up with a substitute here is awesome. So tell us how you cook the kohlrabi hash browns.
Absolutely. So, with the kohlrabi, as you mentioned, that can be tricky to find, just because I feel like I only really see it at farmers markets sometimes, and I've had friends go and look for it. And whether it is kohlrabi, turnip, or rutabaga, the first thing you always want to do is just cut off that really rough skin on the outside, or peel that off. Typically with the kohlrabi, just because the skin is really thick, I just tend to use a knife and try to get that off. And then actually the way to, really prepare this first and foremost is you're using a large grater. So what you would use for, shredding cheese or anything like that, you just take the root vegetable and just grind it against. And depending, you may have other, kitchen equipment that's probably more well equipped. I think there's some like KitchenAid attachments and things like that that allow just for easier shredding of the vegetable in that way. But if you do use a hand grater, you do that. And then basically you just want to try to get a lot of the moisture out, just because with these root veggies, they just tend to have a higher moisture content, at least from what I've found, than your typical potato would. So once you shred it, you basically put it in between, towels and kind of press and remove some of that moisture, just because that will help, fry it up nicely once you're putting it into your saute pan. And then pretty much, after that, once you have that shredded and you've pressed a lot of the moisture out, you put it in, your favorite saute pan. You can use olive oil. That's typically what I use. And I, have the meat on medium or high. And then once that oil is heated, you basically just add a thin layer of that shredded, kohlrabi or root vegetable mix. And then it cooks for about, I would say anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, just depending on how hot your stove top can get. And then you just gently flip it. So you're getting that nice browning, sort of crisping on each side. And then, once you're done with that, you can serve it with, any of your other favorite, breakfast foods or sides or vegetables. And a lot of my friends who have made this, it's interesting because, typically we are used to using potatoes, but, for anybody who's on a low oxalate diet or who's trying to eat, healthier or just have lighter meals, this is definitely a good
Yeah,
substitution
absolutely.
for that.
Yeah, I'm always looking for ways to eat vegetables in general, but especially for breakfast too.
Yeah.
It's another place you can sneak them in.
Definitely. Because I feel like breakfast foods too aren't always traditional, like vegetable dishes except for maybe the potatoes. So it's neat having a few different options.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Do you remember the first time you made these? Did they give you the kohlrabi and it was kind of the first time you had to cook with it, or had you had
Yeah.
experience with it before?
It was the first time I had to cook with it, and I don't think I've ever saw a kohlrabi before that, and at least the kind that I have, I'm sure they look a little bit different. I believe there's some different coloration in the variety, but it was purple and it had like these stems shooting out of it, and I was kind of like, I don't really know what this is. And at first I think I looked at it and I was like, is this some sort of like purple fennel? Like I've never seen this before. So I was trying to look at it and what I end up doing is when I'm trying to create these recipes, like I am, going out and trying to figure out, okay, like root vegetables, like what are ways to prepare this, kind of to your point, what are ways to prepare this in a creative way that makes it taste, good and comforting, but is still healthy. So for me, I wanted to go out and I was reading about people, doing sort of hash browns with, I forget, it wasn't kohlrabi, but it was something else that was, I think somebody might have actually done like carrot hash browns or something like that. So, I was wondering, I was like, this is a hard root vegetable. I'm wondering if this would be something that would work. And this still to date, it still is a very popular recipe on my page. So that's, kind of neat to see that there is a different use for some of these unique looking vegetables that may be a little bit intimidating to approach.
Yeah, I also had no idea what they looked like. I had to Google it, and
Yeah,
there's all kinds of when you look at it, or when you search for it, there's a bunch of different stuff that comes up. So I kind of had to look around a little bit to figure out which one was actually
yep.
the kohlrabi. It seems like the internet's a little confused too.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I think they do look different. The varieties can look different, which can get really confusing.
Yeah, yeah, but I saw that they were on the list that I have of low oxalate vegetables, and then I saw the recipe, and I was like, oh, I definitely have to find out about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure too, if there's any local farm markets in your area or like, people who do any sort of drop-offs, once the summer hits, I would assume that some of them would grow kohlrabi. And I believe I'm not 100% sure on its origin, but I know Taproot Farm, they do a lot of actually Japanese vegetables, and I'm actually not sure where kohlrabi originated from, but I feel like it's probably not local to around here, just because I feel like I haven't really had experience with it until this point in time.
Yeah, yep. And Another thing for people, if you're looking for it in the grocery store, I actually went to ShopRite last night, and I asked the gentleman that was, the gentleman that was in the like restocking the all the vegetables and stuff, and I showed him a picture, and I was like, "Hey, do you have any kohlrabi?" And he kind of looked at it, and he was like, "No, that looks interesting though." And then we were talking for a little bit, and he mentioned that he might be able to order a case or two. So yeah, if you're at the grocery store and you don't see it, but you see a friendly face for somebody that works there, and you want to go for it, it might not hurt to ask to see if they can order it for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's really great.
Yeah. So the next one we have here is the egg stuffed sweet peppers with a
Hmm.
roasted tomatillo sauce. So for this one, I love it because I love breakfast in general. And they're super versatile. You
Yeah.
can scramble up the eggs, stuff the peppers, and then kind of top them with whatever you like.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you do it with what is it with microgreens, and what
Yes.
else?
Microgreens, and then I'm actually looking at the recipe. I mean, like you said, you can always, mix it up, and depending too, how you want your peppers prepared. In this case, I believe that I baked the peppers, and I'm looking at this quickly now, and it really depends because if you want the raw pepper, you really want that crunch. Kind of like you mentioned, it's great. You can scramble or fry an egg, and it's actually, a lot faster. But in the case for this recipe, I actually oven baked them just to make the shells a little bit softer. And it's kind of funny we're looking at this recipe right now because I've been living off of sweet peppers. That's just something right now that I guess just the stores around me have a lot of. So I've been picking up a bag or so many a week. And basically, you can, bake them in the oven with the egg already intact. And that takes about, 30 minutes for that to set. And then it's, kind of ready to eat from there. But you can also, fry that egg and then, put it in the pepper once it's halved and the seeds are removed. And then with the tomatillos, those are a little bit interesting. So you can buy, something similar in the store. So I have seen before tomatillo salsa in some places, and you could buy, regular salsa or something different. But tomatillos were actually something that I first had experience with actually when I worked at the farm or not the farm, excuse me, the community agriculture garden at SU because they were growing them there. And my professor at that time, Dr. Packer, she actually made tomatillo salsa. So it was something that was really good, and I definitely wanted to try again. But it can take a little bit of time just because you do have to bake the tomatillos too. It's not something that can be processed like a raw tomato, to my understanding. So you have to do it a little bit differently. But yeah, it's a good dish. It's versatile. You can add, any toppings that you want, any, cheese or vegetables. And in this case, I believe I used microgreens. You can use, radish greens. You can use, sprouts. I know there's a lot of alfalfa sprouts and broccoli sprouts and things at the market. Or if, you have greens on hand and you want to use those up, sometimes I just cut my greens really fine and just use those as a garnish. And just another way to use those materials in your fridge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking, if you want to get a little crazy, and if I know a lot of people have a love-hate relationship with cilantro, but that might also be
Yeah,
a good, a good topping to throw on there.
absolutely.
Yeah, I worked in a Mexican restaurant for a while,
Oh,
and
okay.
the tomatillo salsa that they made was unbelievable. So I
Mm.
am very familiar, and I'm really really looking forward to this one too. There's
Okay.
also, for anyone who's listening, there's a tomatillo salsa that's actually been tested. It's a specific brand. I think it's Frontera. I'll put a link in the show notes for everyone. But it's been tested. It's low oxalate for a couple tablespoons, I think. So that's a good option if you don't want to roast your own tomatillos. Um, I think I'm gonna give it a whirl though.
Awesome.
All right, cool. So we covered breakfast a little bit. So now we have a dinner dish, which is the spicy kale, bacon, and Asiago spaghetti squash pasta. So this one's cool because spaghetti squash is a great substitute for pasta. And for people that are following this diet, tomato sauce isn't really an option because we tend to really overdo it when it comes to pasta dishes, and it can become pretty
Hmm.
high oxalate. I love finding different ways to sort of experiment with pasta dishes and figure out different things that that it can go with. So this one looks great. Talk us through how you do this one.
So, kind of to your point, I love spaghetti squash. It's super versatile. I've actually used it in pad thai dishes and ramen like dishes. So there's a lot of ways that you can, sort of innovate with the squash. And, first and foremost, with roasting these spaghetti squashes, just make sure that you have a hunk of time that you can dedicate to roasting. Just because depending on how large the squash is, it may take a total of, 80 minutes. So it may take a while just to sit there. And, especially if you have the opportunity, well, at least right now, if you're working from home or have a morning that you can roast up a squash, it just takes a little bit of time. And I just always like to warn people that before you roast it, make sure that you have that squash and you're, using a knife to put large, sort of gashes all over the squash, just because you do want that to have an air release. There have been instances that I've heard of these squashes exploding in ovens, so you definitely don't want to have to deal with that. But really, once you roast one of these ones, you sort of get a hang of it, and once they're roasted, you'll just notice that when it's done, the skin looks a little bit crinkly, it may be a little bit browned. And typically what I do is, I then take that out of the oven. I do cut it in half right away, but just be really careful and, use protective oven mitts or things like that because it will be hot, just to let it kind of, air out and release steam. And it's also an easy way to scoop those seeds and sort of the gut portion out right away, just because I've found that if I've let it cool, sometimes that can just get solidified and it's just harder to get out. And then, if you use a fork, just very gently, you kind of scrape down the sides and then you get that spaghetti looking squash, out of the inside. And then you can always, save this in the fridge and use it later or use it right away. Sometimes I will, roast up a number of squashes, put this in the fridge and then save it for later in the week. It's definitely easy to reheat if you have a saute pan or, if you have to microwave it or something like that. But in this case, pretty easy in the sense that you put the, squash once it's prepared, you put that in a saute pan. You can also, prior to that, prepare some of the kale so you can just, use the saute pan with some stock, kind of cook that down so it's nice and soft and, use some flavoring if possible. And then you can also, in this case, cook your bacon right after that in the same pan. So once you have all of those components cooked, you just sort of compile them all together in a saute pan, reheat everything. You can throw your cheese on top. I know that we talked about, some of my recipes, I've used black pepper, but in the case of a low oxalate diet, you can use white pepper, and then use that for some additional flavoring. So, like I mentioned, squash, it's easy to dress up and add ingredients. So if you do have other vegetables on hand or anything that you do want to prepare and mix in, it's kind of easy just to heat all of those components together and have it ready to go.
Awesome. This is this is so helpful for me and for other kitchen noobs out there like me because you mentioned you don't want the spaghetti squash to explode, obviously. So make
Yes.
sure to pierce it a couple of times. But what I've been doing is trying to cut an entire spaghetti squash in half,
Yep.
which
Yep.
is so difficult unless you have
Oh yeah.
like probably like a top of the line chef knife. Um,
Yep.
yes,
Yeah, I had a few close calls with just like cutting myself from doing that. So I was like, there has to be another way out
yeah,
there. And yeah, I just really, to your point, I just pierce it all over. I guess for me too, I'm always like anxious. I'm like, I don't want to take any risks here. So I just basically, gash into the squash. I mean, I guess if you have to release some like energy out there,
yeah.
you need that. It's a way to prepare it. So
I'm pretty sure I've avoided cooking the squash. Like I've seen it on my counter and thought to myself, maybe I'll have that for dinner tonight. But then I thought
yep.
about trying to cut it in half, and I was like, maybe I'll
Oh
just
yeah.
have something else.
Yeah. And also too, you can prepare other squashes this way. So that's something that I've found and experimented with. So I actually got some oh gosh, I believe it was called acorn squash over the summer from Taproot, and I was like, I don't even know how to prepare this because to your point, the shells of these squashes can be, really hard to cut through, and I don't have a really top line knife either. So, I'm just trying to figure out, what's the easiest way to do this. And I've also done it with butternut squash too. I have, pierced it and just cooked it that way, and it has made it a little bit easier. I've also read some places which I've never personally tried, but I think there's a way to also microwave some of the squashes before cooking it. So if your intention would be to try to, have it before cooking or anything like that, I believe there's some sort of methods out there that you can microwave it and that kind of softens the shells so you aren't, risking chopping off an arm or something while trying to cut it in half.
Yep. And you probably want to pierce it before you put it into the microwave also, right?
Yeah, I would assume so. But actually, that's a method that I haven't tried, so I'm not sure what exactly that looks like. But I do know just from oven roasting it that I always pierce it just to have that
Yeah.
air filter type
Yep.
aspect.
Cool. And you also mentioned, which I would not have done if you didn't, to put the squash on a baking sheet when it goes into the oven. I
Mm.
assume it's gonna like it'll drip and make a bunch of
Yes,
smoke
that's
and yeah.
actually a great point. Typically I actually use if you have like a actually more like a bowl or like a container that's a little bit deeper, just because it will release some of the liquid and actually what I end up doing, I do end up typically foil lining pans. I don't typically like to do that, but for squash it does, leak out some liquid when you're cooking it and it can get kind of really baked into the pan. So if you do want a quick and easy cleanup, I definitely recommend using foil if you need that or just don't want to spend a lot of time washing the pan. And then too, when you're scooping like the guts and seeds out, what I end up doing is just putting that right into the foil and then bundling everything and throwing it away.
Gotcha. All right. Awesome. Yeah, that sounds. This one sounds really good. Anything with bacon and cheese on it, I'm all about it. So
Absolutely.
yeah. And when in doubt, if you're trying to make a vegetable taste good, that's you really can't go wrong. Um,
Yes, exactly.
cool. So you were saying, I want to go back to the stuffed peppers real quick. When we were emailing before this, you were saying that um, if you didn't have some of, I think it was the microgreens or was it the sprouts
Yes.
where you can grow your own?
Yes. So there's actually, and I believe you can buy the seeds, and one that's coming to mind for me was actually one that my brother had gifted me a few years back, and it was called Maggie's Microgreens. And it basically came in a little kit, and you can grow them using just a small, planter. If you're in an apartment space or a smaller space, they're easy to grow. They don't really take that long to grow either, because basically what you're doing is you're just growing sort of the mini or sprout version of the vegetable and then harvesting it right away. So kind of like how you can do like an indoor herb garden. These sprouts are easy to grow, and you can use, little scissors to clip them off and then use as many as you want for your meal. So that's something that I have grown a few times in the past, and it's really easy to do. I haven't had any issues with the vegetable dying or anything, even with it being on just a small indoor countertop near sunlight. But I haven't had issues growing it.
Cool. Are are microgreens like another step in the process of sprouting the seeds? So if you have broccoli seeds and
Hmm.
if you sprout them for a little bit, they can become the sprouts, obviously. But then if is the microgreens, if you like let them keep growing a little bit more, like the next stage almost.
Yeah, typically, it's just above that sprout stage, I would say. So, they're a little bit just bigger looking, but I mean, still close to that sprout stage. So they're not the fully evolved. I actually have had a few instances where I've grown these outside and I've let them go, and then they've become sort of the full blown version of what I'm looking for. So I did this with kale sprouts the other year. So yeah, you're just basically cutting it at the early stages. So like I mentioned, typically these just don't take long to grow. But once they, are sort of just very fluffy looking, I don't know how else to describe it, and kind of full. It kind of looks like, your whole container's full of like a moss layer. That's basically them when I've been harvesting them.
Cool. All right. Yeah, I know. So I know alfalfa sprouts and broccoli sprouts have been tested for their oxalate levels, and they're low. And
Nice.
maybe for some of the other microgreens, we can send some out maybe too eventually and have them tested. Because I
Definitely.
know they're very good for you too. Um,
Yeah.
so people might want to include them, with this, and then with whatever other dishes they think it might go with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're just kind of a fun garnisher topping. So, kind of to your point, like if you're using, cilantro or, parsley or any sort of garnish, it's just another way to kind of change it up and get a different flavor.
Cool. Yeah, so for everyone listening, we're going to have links to everything that we're talking about, links for the recipes here. We'll show you the modifications to make them to make sure that they're low in oxalate. And then, did you want to talk about the ECRI Institute and how that kind of fits into your journey also?
Yeah, sure. So, I mentioned that my day job, I work at ECRI, and so we're a nonprofit located in suburban Philadelphia, and really, it's nice to mention just because I feel like everything involved with my career and also doing cooking, and it really just kind of revolves around me, around just empowering people with information. So, in ECRI's case, we're helping hospital systems and payers and a number of providers just get information they need to make informed decisions in the healthcare field. So, specifically, the area that I work in, I work as an implementation specialist for our clinical evidence assessment service. So, we're helping hospitals with locating clinical literature just to inform their decisions on medical devices, technologies, drugs, anything like that. And really that as a scientist, that was kind of, sort of my, mission and passion as I'm approaching, career in life that I just wanted the ability to help people with information and have learning resources. So, the Kitchenologist in my blog and these recipes and helping Taproot Farm just really kind of combine into this, just because I feel like, information, as I mentioned, is power. So if you do have the resources and the tools available, I feel like then you're able to learn and grow and make informed choices that way.
Yeah, for sure. And one important thing about the ECRI Institute is, um, which is key when you're looking for non-biased information out there, is that they don't
Mhm.
take any donations from any pharmaceutical companies or any
Yep.
drug companies or anything.
Absolutely. Yeah, we don't take any sort of payouts from that. We don't have, any skin in the game per se, as a lot of my colleagues like to say. And our CFO, Chief Financial Officer, he hand reviews everybody's tax returns each year. So really just further transparency, just ensuring that, everybody is committed to the cause of just getting people truthful, unbiased information so they can make decisions. And because I mean, with anything, in life, we were surrounded by, advertisements, and it's hard to know, if what, media is showing or advertising companies are showing or manufacturers, if those things are actually true. So we, really take pride in showing people factual information so they can use that. And especially, our mission is to improve patient safety worldwide. And I feel good going to work every day knowing that that's what this work is benefiting and contributing toward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I plan on doing a post on this at some point in the future, but you know, it's very important when you're looking for any sort of uh, information online. When it comes to diet and nutrition and all this stuff, there's people find studies, and you can sort of find a study that'll support whatever hypothesis you have.
Mhm.
But it's very one of the important things to do when you're searching through that stuff is to be aware of any bias that might be present, because
Absolutely.
if you're looking for something about, let's say, like, are french fries healthy, I'm sure you can find a study out there that says french fries are great for you, like you should eat
Yep.
them every day, blah blah blah. And then if you
Yep.
look in the notes on the bottom, you can see that someone who is involved in, like, with McDonald's is sponsoring the post or something like that. Like, it's a
Yep.
terrible example, but stuff like that happens all the
Oh
time.
yeah.
So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think of, a lot of claims now in the food industry, and that was actually something at Susquehanna in that course my senior year we looked at was, claims that food companies are allowed to make. And I know for a while, for example, Cheerios was posting on their boxes that, it can help lower cholesterol. So there was a lot of kind of kickback with that because they were wondering, are there a lot of studies regarding this? Were the studies, sponsored by General Mills? Like, what's the factual information? And I believe I'm trying to think of some other brands, but I know we looked at Activia, which was saying that it could, regulate your digestive system. But it's interesting reading sort of, especially in the U.S., their food labeling standards and things like that, just because there are certain things that people can say or post on their product. I know recently I was reading an article just saying that, people, if, for instance, the organic seal. That's something that you do have a government regulation behind, but you could put things like healthy and natural on your labeling, but it doesn't necessarily have to align with what you think that actually means.
Right. Right. I saw a, when you like, when you're walking down the street and you walk past a bar or a restaurant or a store, some of them
Hmm.
have those stands outside, with like an advertisement for their happy hour or whatever the special
Yep.
is for the day. I saw one outside of a juice store, I think,
Okay.
that said, what was it? It said, mercury and arsenic are like organic and natural, but they'll also kill you. So like, watch out for
Yep.
health buzzwords.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's true. And I even think about that too, because I have in my past research worked with the dietary supplement industry. And that's something that, a lot of people, there's a reliance on supplements and some of these weight loss products, and they claim to do X, Y, and Z. And even though they're all natural, or at least what they say, there's nothing tested out there that's saying combining caffeine with, 5 times the amount of daily vitamin D you should have is something that's good for your body. So there's definitely, studies needed and research needed for these types of things.
Yeah, for sure. Um, cool. So I think that's a good place for us to wrap up. Is there anything that you
Great.
think we left out, or any tips or tricks or things to make cooking a little bit easier? Anything that you think we should include for everyone also?
Yeah, no, and I think for me, just a thing to include about, making cooking fun and engaging, don't be afraid to try new kitchen tools, and don't think those tools have to be expensive. That's another thing that, for instance, I use a mandolin a lot, but it's just a small hand mandolin. It was like $20. And originally, when I was looking at mandolins, there were like $200 ones. And I was like, oh my gosh, do I have to invest in that? And at one point, I was looking at a sort of a zoodle contraption for making zucchini noodles, and that was like $100. But all my kitchen tools are probably relatively like $20 and under.
Hmm.
So if you do see something and it, has gotten good reviews, I wouldn't say it's a bad thing to try. I'm thinking of some of my favorites. So I mentioned the mandolin. Just be careful using those. But it's a great way to just transform some of these vegetables that you may be hesitant to try, or in the case of root vegetables especially, they're really healthy for you, but they do have a bitter taste. So it is nice when you can use a mandolin to really get thin slices and prepare them that way, and kind of along the lines of grating the vegetables too, just because that breaks it down a bit. And then I also have a kale destemmer. I know that's really random. It's just this little handheld thing, but I feel like I eat a lot more kale now that I have it. Just because before I feel like I was using like scissors or different things, which would make it a bit trickier. And also too, having a good pair of kitchen scissors. It's interesting. I have a lot of friends that, I tell them that scissors are one of my main things in the kitchen that I use for clipping things or cutting them, and they're like, I never thought about having a pair of just dedicated kitchen scissors. And I don't know, for me, that was sort of a life-changing kitchen accessory. But yeah, I just, general advice to people, just feel free to experiment, have friends, test the food. You're going to have failures. We all do, trying to make something in the kitchen.
Hmm.
Um, so, just keep in mind as you're experimenting to keep trying things out, and, you'll find your favorites. And I don't know, with anything, practice makes perfect. So, you get better with time, and before you know it, you'll be a kitchen pro.
Yeah, that's awesome. I use the scissors in the kitchen every single time that I cook. So I
Awesome.
definitely recommend that too. And then the thing you were saying about how, you're going to have some failures sometimes, that
Hmm.
definitely happens. And I just read recently somewhere, I forget where it was, that if you're experimenting in the kitchen and you something new and you don't really know how it's going to come out, uh, to have a couple like takeout menus next to you, ready
Ah,
to go, and like have your food
yeah.
picked out, what you're going to order just in case it doesn't work out. And
I like
yeah,
that.
just so
I
you're
like
ready to
that.
go just in case.
Yeah, no, it's a good. I mean, I'm thinking of one particular thing that I tried making. I read somewhere that you can make like cabbage noodles. It was like this modified, I don't know, pasta version, and it was like this cabbage Alfredo thing. It was not good. So, I think cabbage for me is still a struggle to cook with, but I think we all, even if you get better and better, there's always still that, I don't know, something that poses a challenge. So, just keep exploring. And also, too, there's a lot of things that you can, eat raw or prepare in different ways. I know there's a lot of ways to pickle things or, put them in the fridge and do certain things that way, too. So, things can taste differently depending on how you make them and what you combine them with. So I just, always say to be open minded. And if you haven't tried something before, especially adding something in like we talked about, like cheese or bacon, so something familiar that you enjoy, that definitely helps, maybe cut back on the process of, oh, okay, I'm eating a lot of vegetables here.
Yep. Cool. I was so excited for the cabbage one. I thought you were going to tell me how to make cabbage into pasta, and I got so excited. So maybe.
Yeah, it was, the recipe that I saw when I was Googling, I mean, it looked really great. Maybe it's something I'll try approaching again in the future. But yeah, cabbage is still something I'm working on. But I do have friends that like to boil the cabbage leaves. So they'll take it apart leaf by leaf, and then they'll actually use that as sort of a wrap for like ground meat or other veggies or things like that. And then they, dip it in a sauce. So that's a way I've heard of cabbage being used, that it sounds really delicious, and I would definitely like to try that out.
Cool. Well, hopefully one of us figures it out, and then maybe we can
Yeah,
circle back and do a round two and kind of. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, that sounds great to me.
that's a good hook. We'll leave people hanging so that they come back for more.
Love it.
Cool. Awesome. Alysha, where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
Absolutely. So please feel free to visit my blog. It's The Kitchenologist. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram, which you can see my name. It's pretty straightforward. It's Alysha Melnyk on Instagram, and same on LinkedIn. But yeah, feel free to reach out to me there. I'm happy if you have any direct questions too, and reach out. I can provide email or anything like that.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, and we look forward to maybe doing this again in the future.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. If you want, you can find the show notes and links to everything that we talked about at lowoxalatekitchen.com/podcast. Be sure to connect with Alysha on Instagram and LinkedIn if you want. You can find all of the recipes with their modifications to make them low oxalate on my website at lowoxalatekitchen.com. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. You can send me an email anytime, lowoxalatekitchen@gmail.com. If you found this episode useful and you want to share with a friend or leave a review, that would be awesome. You could also do both, and that would be even more awesome. Hope everyone is staying safe and doing well, and we'll see you next time.